Hi guys and welcome to my latest video. Now what we have here today is Acoustics 3030i. And those speakers I had for like several months already, and I've been postponing this review because I was searching for the right words to describe it, and I think I finally got them. So let's start. And I'm just quickly going to mention few features of this speaker, and then I'm going to move to the sound quality and comparisons as usual. So it's the biggest bookshelf speaker in this range. So 3030i, the biggest one with 6.25 inches woofer / mid-range cone, while 3020i and 3010i are the smaller ones. Now, if you look at it directly from the front, you might not notice that it looks fairly compact, but don't be fooled by that, because its depth is considerable, and that's what makes high volume in this speaker. You can see like it's pretty deep. So if you need speakers that you can put close to the wall and just you want them to sit there inconspicuously, these are probably not the ones you're looking for. But because of that, we get some sonic benefits that I'll talk about later. Now, anything else, yeah, the bass reflex port is located on the back. So again, if you want something that you can push really close to the walls, these are not speakers for you. Okay, that would be it for the speaker itself. Now let's move to the sound quality. How does it sound? First of all, that I mentioned it has higher volume than your average small desktop-friendly bookshelf speaker, and that means it has pretty authoritative bass line. Now what this means is that the bass line goes deep, and it has really decent grunt, you know. It's giving like a solid bass to everything. But good news, don't stop there. Bass line, fortunately, is very quick. It's quite decently controlled, it's nimble, so it's not the type of bass that will just melt the tones into each other and make like a big bloated mess. No way. It has depth, but it has control, it's quick, you can easily distinguish different bass notes from each other. That's all really nice. Now, interesting thing when it comes to upper bass, it's not that pronounced and it's not really that elevated. It's again just quick, neat, well controlled, that's all. But with that, there's one interesting thing happening, because that upper bass is actually what's giving kind of boldness and chestiness to the sound that we perceive as a mid-range. So for example, if a vocal sings and we say, wow, this is some full, chesty, deep vocal, we actually hear the details, texture, and edges from the mid-range part, but that chestiness and boldness are coming from the upper bass region. And I feel that Acoustics is not actually emphasizing that part. So when we come to mid-range and vocals, they sound rich, they sound very informative, but I wouldn't call them bold or full. So take any powerful male vocal and you'll hear a lot of details, a lot of presence. It's very clear, it's focused, it's right in the center of the image, all perfect, but there is no much boldness and chestiness as with some other speakers. It's just focusing more on that pure mid-range part. And on one hand, that sounds very clean, precise and informative, but I sometimes miss that bold and chesty presentation that some other speakers can offer, but I'll directly compare it with some other speakers a little bit later. Now, to continue with frequency response, and we are still on the mid-range part, upper mid-range feels a little bit elevated. And when I say upper mid-range, I think somewhere around 4, 5, 6, 7 kilohertz. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm definitely sure that it is a little bit elevated, because when I listen to, again, vocals, especially female ones, I feel that those edges and huskiness and texture, these are pronounced a little bit more than the body of the tone itself. So when I listen to female vocals, I notice that things like sh, s, are a little bit emphasized. Now, it's not that much, I wouldn't call it sibilant. It's not that annoying, it doesn't sound really out of place, but these parts are definitely tilted up a little bit. And again, that's very informative when it comes to details and everything. It makes these vocals feel very present in space, but it doesn't feel so neutral to me, to be completely honest. It doesn't feel so natural. So most of the times I'm aware that I'm listening to a speaker that adds a little bit of its own sound signature to everything. Now, that said, let me finish with frequency response. Highest, like really high region is not that bright and that elevated. I think that probably somewhere after 10 kilohertz things are starting to slowly roll down, so that highest region is maybe even slightly tame. It will not light up the scene like some other speakers. But frequency response aside, how does it actually sound, like dynamically and spatially, things like that, you know? So 3030i can create like really nice soundstage, and this is a precise speaker. All of these that I mentioned, that upper bass is not that elevated, but it's neat and precise, and mid-range is very informative, actually translates into well-organized sound. Now, I cannot emphasize this enough. These sound well-organized and well-composed, no matter what type of material I throw at them. They have their arrangement, they put instruments precisely in the soundstage, and even when things get busy and loud and a lot of instruments are playing at the same time, they never lose composure. They never become bloated and melted and just make a mess out of things. No way. These stay neat, precise, and at all times I can say like this instrument kept its place throughout the whole song. And all the other instruments and vocals relative to it kept their own positions, and the soundstage was calm and organized and composed. And that's really, really great quality. Dynamically speaking, these are not that dynamic sounding and engaging speakers. If anything, they're more like laid back, you know, just chilling there. I wouldn't use sedated, actually, that would be too much, but they'll never offer like dynamic, snappy, energetic presentation like, let's say, Klipsch, for example. You just have to accept that that's their character. They're calm, informative, organized, and just slightly laid back, slightly dynamically tamed. And that's something that I have divided emotions about, because, for example, if I'm listening to my music and I only focus on the music, I like speaker to be just a little bit more evolving and to just grab my attention a little bit more. But I actually, the more I listened to these Q Acoustics, the more I started to appreciate that trait, because it has its upsides. For example, if I was watching movies or binging TV series on Netflix whole day, and I do that sometimes, I realized that 3030i creates great sound, and I hear everything going on, and I can listen to it quite loudly without them ever getting tiring. With other speakers that are more dynamic, more involving, like Klipsch, for example, or Cath LS50s, I feel more engaged, but after prolonged listening, I feel like I want to decrease the loudness level a little bit or stop watching something. But with these Q Acoustics, I could go all day. And I think they're perfect for people that like listening music for a long periods of time, and they don't want something that's in your face and that's demanding your attention. Also, as I mentioned, great for binge watching TV series and things like that, because they simply never get tiring. They're just calm and composed. And as I mentioned, mixed emotions about that. Sometimes I lack a little bit of excitement and more engagement, but sometimes I really appreciate this approach to the sound. Okay, now this leads me to some comparisons. So the first one I'm going to talk about are Elac's debut B5.2 that I reviewed actually recently. And to be fair, 6.2 would be much better competition for 3030i because they're bigger and more equal in price, but I have these, so I'm just going to compare some tonal differences quickly. And that said, you probably already know, if you watched that review, that I liked Elacs a lot. I said that they have even-handed tonal balance that I really appreciated, and I couldn't notice where one driver ends and the other begins, or any other quirkiness when it comes to frequency response and the signature of those speakers. So compared directly to 3030i, I still feel that holds, and that Elacs are more even-handed when it comes to their response, and they sound more like one whole unity sound that when I listen to it, I don't think in terms of frequency regions and things like that. I just hear a sound that sounds more natural to me. So why am I saying that? Because as I mentioned earlier, mid-range on 3030i is a little bit tilted up towards higher mid-range frequencies. It's emphasizing that part a little bit, while Elacs are more even-handed in my opinion. You have the same amount of like tonal fullness and vocal chestiness, and all of these edges and textures just naturally attach to that tone body. With 3030i, I feel, as I mentioned, that mid-range is slightly tilted up towards higher part of the mid-range, and that those textures and details are a little bit emphasized and presence region is a little bit emphasized, while the tone body and fullness took a step back. And when it comes to highest frequencies, again, there's slight difference. 3030i are a little bit darker and more tame, while Elacs are a little bit more lit up. They light the scene a little bit more with these highest frequencies. And that means that Q Acoustics can be a little bit more forgiving with bad recordings, while Elacs will light up the scene a little bit more. And yeah, it's difficult really to make decision here, but on tonal balance only, I do prefer Elacs a little bit. I feel they're more natural sounding. Now, when it comes to sheer dynamics, 3030i do sound livelier and more dynamic, and part of that at least might be due to a bigger cone and simply bigger box volume. I haven't heard B6.2, I would really like to compare these directly, but I don't have them. So to wrap this up quickly, these do have a little bit more authority and grunt than B5.2. They sound a little bit livelier, and they're also a little bit easier to drive in my opinion. but Elacs sound a little bit more tonally correct and natural, at least to my ears. Now, next comparison would be with Klipsch RP-600Ms. I don't have these anymore with me, but I did have both of these speakers at the same time for a few months. And that is interesting comparison actually, because they do have some similar traits, but they are quite different, and I'll explain. What's similar about them is that both Klipsch and Acoustics have that mid-range that's slightly tilted up towards higher frequencies and slightly lacking tone body and tone fullness. But everything else except that is quite different, so I'll explain. Let's start with the bass line. For example, 3030i has deeper bass. It can dig deeper and its bass has more authority to it. But Klipsch counter with more pronounced mid bass that makes complete bass line sound warmer and lusher. Now, depending on your taste, you might prefer any of these. Regarding bass line, I personally prefer Acoustics because it digs deeper, but it's more controlled and more precise. It has more authority when it needs to. It has more control when it needs control. I prefer its bass line. Now, when it comes to that mid-range part, I said very similar voicing, very similar tuning. They both emphasize these edges and textures a little bit, like higher mid-range. But Klipsch sounds a little bit shoutier, while these sound a little bit drier. That said, Klipsch is also somewhat hazier. When you actually think in terms of tiny details and digging every last piece of information, these do better job at that. Because Klipsch, in its more like slightly shouty approach, sounds a little bit smoother and a little bit more liquidy, but it tends to cover some tiny details that 3030i here reveals more easily and more readily. But as I mentioned, it sounds just a touch drier in comparison to Klipsch. But the biggest difference is probably the way they handle dynamics. Because Klipsch, they're like party ready. They're really dynamic, they're really engaging, ready to go always. While 3030i is just a little bit more laid back, a little bit more composed and cool. And I don't know, you might prefer each of these. It boils down to personal preferences. Because if you really want that passion, that engagement, you don't mind upper bass that's a little bit loosey, but it provides a little bit more warmth and a little bit more fun maybe, Klipsch might be better choice for you. And if you like things more controlled and more composed, just like opposite of that loosey Klipsch character, then you might prefer 3030i. And it came to my mind, like, if these speakers would be people, and for example, they needed to tell you about their vacation that was exactly the same, Klipsch would tell you this kind of story. Oh yeah, man, I went to Brazil and to this small beautiful village on top of the mountain. It was so great, you know, people were so friendly and they offered us all kind of exotic fruits. Everything tasted so good. I can still taste it. It was just the best vacation ever. You have to go there sometimes. I'm telling you, it will be the trip of your life. If 3030i would tell the exact same story, it would be like, yeah, man, I went to Brazil. It was really nice, you know. We visited this small village on the top of a mountain and it was cool, you know, like natives were friendly, really. They offered us different kind of fruits and foods and most of them were quite tasty. So all in all, you know, it was quite interesting trip and I'm glad I went there. From time to time, you just need that change of pace and to try something new. Yeah, so I don't know if this was very helpful, but I just wanted to convey the energy and emotion that Klipsch is trying to throw at you, and the cool-headed, like realistic approach, a little bit laid back and less involved, that 3030i is offering. So just please don't ask me which one is better, I cannot tell that. For music, most of the times I did prefer Klipsch because it just gets me more excited about music. If I'm just sitting and doing nothing else, just listening to the music, I prefer that engagement that Klipsch is providing. But if I actually wanted to listen to a music as a background while I read some news or do some house chores, or maybe I'm just binging Netflix for several hours, I actually preferred 3030i because it's not trying to grab my attention all the time, and it's just more relaxing for prolonged periods of use. So that would be it. I hope this review will be at least a little helpful to you, because as I mentioned, I struggled finding words to describe 3030i, but my final opinion, it is a really good speaker. In some things, it's probably the best in its class, like that organization of the sound and composure. But if we are talking about tonal balance, I maybe prefer Elacs a little bit. If we talk about engagement and dynamics, I do prefer Klipsch. So it's a really good speaker. It has its strengths, it has its weaknesses. So I don't know, weigh these for yourself and decide, is that the sound that you would like to have for yourself? So that's it. If you liked the video, please click that button, share it with your friends, leave a comment below, tell me what you think about it, and see you next time. Bye.